Hey friends, it's rskt. Welcome to the third and final installment where I show you how I created this animated logo using Affinity Designer, Moho Pro, Adobe After Effects, and Ableton Live. In this video, I'll be taking you through how I brought everything else together into After Effects, save for a couple of animations that I went back and did in Moho Pro, and also showing you how I sourced all of these samples and music that I was going to use in the background and compiled it together using Ableton Live. For that last part, I haven't really done many music or sound related tutorials on this channel yet, so it's kind of new territory. But I actually do have a second channel that's devoted to uploading music and music tutorials over there. Usually they're more software and synth based and music related, whereas this is kind of something else entirely. And I definitely felt it was more suited to leave here on the art channel and sort of incorporate it with the rest of this series. That being said, if you haven't checked it out already, it's a relatively small channel that I don't get as much time to put into as I would like. I have very big plans for it, but for now, feel free to go and check it out and see what you think. Anyways, enough chit chat, let's dive in and have a look at how we go about finishing all of this. So we could continue trying to achieve the rest of the animation in Moho, but at this point, I'd already spent a lot of time on it. I was mainly using Moho to animate the character anyway, and I already kind of knew how I would go about animating the rest in After Effects. So I do hop back into Moho periodically for a couple of things, just for ease of use, but the rest of the animation is completed in After Effects, save for a few objects. So coming back into Affinity Designer, it was now time to redraw a lot of different elements and make sure that they were split up across different layers. This meant that I had to redraw the rows and the shadows and nearly just about everything because there was always an object sitting in front of another object that I needed to animate. So basically just went through the whole process of redesigning different things, bringing them into After Effects and setting up keyframes and correct layer orders. So here you can see that I've just animated a single rose that basically just scales and rotates until it sort of looks like it's opening up. And then I've just duplicated that for the other two roses. The most complex part of all of this really was just checking the layer order of everything. I've basically got this circle that pops up and the girl appears in it. Other things are contained within the circle and other things aren't. There's a lot of pre-compositions, there's a lot of masking and alpha channels that are being used to achieve this. For example, the character actually does pop out of the circle. However, when the circle is animating in at the very start of the animation, she needs to be contained within it. So there is a period where she is contained within it, and then I've duplicated the layer and continued the animation on top of everything else. So a little bit of a convoluted process, but it was all just about working it out as I went through. The majority of my time during this process was really just spent redrawing a lot of different objects. The animation side wasn't too difficult. Whenever I animate something like this in After Effects, I'm basically just putting in the basic keyframes, applying easing, and then going into the graph editor to adjust just how much easing I want when all of these things are animating. So for the paper and glue, I wanted something that I don't think would have been particularly easy to achieve in After Effects. So I jumped back to Moho to complete that part. Basically, I wanted to make sure that the paper could pop up in the view, but it's rolled up slightly, and I wanted to be able to unroll it and roll it up as the glue dropped down on top of it. So I redraw the paper into separate layers in Moho and then set up a smart bone that allows me to animate just that. The idea is that I wanted the paper to appear, open up all the way, and then as it rolls up to close, the glue drops down on top of it, and I wanted the rolled part of the paper to bounce off of the glue. So I knew what I was trying to achieve, and it was a little bit of trial and error, but I think it all came together nicely in the end. This meant that I had to animate the glue and the glue's lid in Moho as well, because they're all sort of happening within that piece of paper. I wanted the glue to drop down with a tiny bit of squash and stretch and have the glue's brush pop out as it hit the table. Next up, there is a ribbon that you barely see animating for half a second, but it is there. So rather than redraw it in Affinity Designer, I just drew this with some tools in After Effects and then animated the three parts of it so that it gave the illusion that it was sort of unraveling as it rolled across the table. Next up, we have the cup with all of the pens in it. I basically redesigned them in Affinity Designer as well and animated it within After Effects, except for the fluffy brush that has the love hearts hanging off of it. I wanted to try something out in Moho I hadn't tried before. So basically, I went ahead and animated this whole thing within Moho. What I really wanted to try out was setting up bones for the little love hearts on the chains that are hanging off of this, and seeing if I could use the physics tool to simulate a swinging motion, kind of like a pendulum. I wanted to see if it was faster to do it this way than it was with hand, and it turned out it really was a hell of a lot quicker. You don't really have to think too much when computers are doing the heavy lifting for you. So I'm really glad that I did it like that. At this point, I was nearly finished the whole animation, so I cut out each individual letter, saved them as their own PNGs, and brought them into After Effects. And I decided to animate these all at the same time and then stagger the animation later on to sort of give a little bit more variation. So I've made them drop and bounce in. And then my next task was to animate the path of a single stroke to sort of give it like an elastic bounce and make sure that it was the right size for each letter, and then stagger the animation so that nothing was actually happening at the same time. I thought this process would have taken me a lot longer, which is why I left it to last, but it actually wound up being one of the easiest parts of the entire process. So now we're up to the final stage of the animation. Now in the background of the original image, there are these tiny little yellow dots sort of there is like a little bit of a detailed, sparkly background, I suppose. And I thought it would be really cool to set up a particle system within After Effects and tweak a few parameters until it kind of looked like that, but was sort of flowing up like bubbles. So I used the Particle World plugin that comes with After Effects to set this up, and just tried and tested a few different tools until I got it looking the way I wanted to. And there you have it. That was pretty much the entire animation process completed. So there's a lot going on all at once, but I'm really, really happy with how it turned out. So I wound up going down south and visiting my parents' place. They have a craft room where my sister and my mum get a lot of their work done. And I didn't have any audio equipment with me, so I just used my phone to record some samples from things that were in the craft room and then imported them to Ableton so I could start making some sound effects. So here we are in Ableton, and basically all I've done is broken up the long recording I did of all of the sound effects into little chunks that I thought would suit the animation, and then imported the video. Now, currently I can't show you the video. I'm having an issue with my laptop, but normally the process would involve having the video window open, and as you play throughout your music timeline, the video starts and stops depending on where you are. So that makes it really easy to be able to sync up sound effects and music to video projects. I have the codec installed on my desktop computer. I don't have it installed on my laptop. So that's why we're seeing this error message right now. But we don't really need to see that. We're just here to focus on the sound. So I did my best to label each track depending on what I thought that sound effect was going to relate to. And on a lot of these, you're going to usually see a lot of similar effects. I tried to use stock effects mostly. So what I like to do is EQ the sound either before or after the compressor, depending on its use case. And yeah, then I throw in a glue compressor. The glue compressor has a little bit more character than the standard Ableton compressor, but you could use whatever compressor you want to. For those that don't understand what compression is, it's basically like somebody automatically turning up and turning down the volume of certain parts of your clip. So what I'm using it for here is to do a lot of compression. I'll just isolate this clip and play it. All right, so that's the cup. Not really that much going on, but you can see that as I play through, this line goes up quite high. And then I've brought it in at around 44%. So that's kind of like a dry and wet control. So basically it's making louder parts of the sound quieter to sit evenly with the quieter parts of the sound. Lastly, I just threw on a saturator for a tiny little bit of grit, but mainly just for added perceived volume. The utility's here just to control the volume a little further. This whole process is kind of messy, so I do sort of have like odd effects like this just sitting there for me to play around with, but it worked at the time I was using it. The next section, I didn't put any effects on that one at all. Then we have the pens coming in. So I have a gate over here just to knock out some of the background reverb I was getting in that room. If I turn some of these off, we get this. So the gate is just taking out some of that background noise really quickly. Then the EQ is just getting rid of some of the low end and a lot of the high end as well. And then the compressor is just evening things out. Next up we have the roses, which sound like this. Now there's actually a little bit going on here. So I've laid up two sounds, the first one being this, and the second one being this. More of a sort of splashy sound. So we basically have the same effects applied to each, like I just ran through before. But I've also put a envelope follower and an auto filter on the end as well. So basically, this is taking the incoming audio signal and controlling the frequency knob on a filter so that it almost gives like a little bit of a splashy opening effect. It's super subtle, it's super fast, maybe even super unnecessary, but I can hear the difference. So without all of these effects on this track, we just have this. And with them, so it's a little splashier. Now we have the strings here. So these are the little rubber strings that are dropping down at the end of the animation with all of the letters hanging off of them. Let's have a listen. So you'll notice that every time I play this, it actually sounds slightly different. I didn't really care exactly how it sounded. I just knew the effect I wanted. So I could have resampled this so that it was the same every single time. But I didn't wind up doing that. So yeah, we have the basic gate, the EQ, but then I've put a delay on, and I've repitched the delay with a little bit of filter. I've also got a little bit of delay introduced into one of these send effects as well. So we'll turn that off. We just have this. So this was me just flicking a rubber band. Then if we put that delay back, we have a little bit of delay added to the sound, not much. And then I've got the delay effect down here with the repitching going on, just to make it seem like there's a lot more strings dropping down than the 3 little samples here. Next up we have the scissors. Same sort of effects here. Just took out most of the low end. Then we have the handle of the paper machine, which was just swinging back and forth. Now I also added in a tiny little bit of reverb to this track as well, just through one of these send effects. And that just helps give it a little bit more space. Cool, so that was pretty much all of the sound effects side of things done. All together, they just sounded like this. Cool, so pretty basic. Then I needed to add in some music. So I knew straight away that I wanted the music to be quite short, have a little bit of a motif, and probably play in a major key, just so that it sounded bright and happy. Now, just a quick note on this guitar track. I will go over everything here, but basically at the end of both guitar tracks, I was getting quite a bit of noise. I should have used my electric guitar, but I ran out of strings and I hadn't restrung it yet because it had a broken one. So I'd used my old crappy acoustic guitar. It's an acoustic electric, but I didn't have a 9-volt battery that I could put in there, so I could plug it into Ableton. So I just recorded it directly with my mic, and that introduced a fair amount of background noise. Now you can't see it here. I'm using a isotope denoise plugin that I have just to take out some of the last little bit of noise at the end. I don't have that installed on my laptop. My laptop's super slow and I don't really use it that much for music production anymore. But that's what's missing here. So there might be a little bit of noise at the tail end, but yeah. Anyways, so let's have a listen to just the raw audio. We'll turn off all of these effects. I'll just group these other ones so it's a little bit easier. Sweet. And here is the raw guitar sound. Let's turn on some of these guitar sounds now. So I have this audio effect track that was made by Cedar Stage. He did a really awesome video about how to basically build a guitar cabinet and amp setup in Ableton. If we turn that on, we basically have a pedal at the start with an amplifier, and then we have this audio effect track with 2 cabinets in it. And the 2 cabinets are set up like this. After that, we have another glue compressor, and that's pretty much it. So that makes it sound a lot more like a guitar that you would expect to hear. Next up, I've just used EQ8 to take out some of the harsher frequencies in that sound. Then we have a saturator, just to add a little bit more volume. Some multi-band dynamics, just to do some more interesting stuff with the mid and low end. And I have this reverb added onto the end, but I've put the dry and wet all the way down. I don't think I wound up using it. So I experimented a little bit with playing over that and came up with a short motif that basically uses the exact same effect rack with a few altered settings. And I put a little bit of reverb and delay on this part. I'll just turn those off for now. Yeah, there's that washy noise that you can hear at the tail end there. That's what that isotope plugin is for, but yes, I don't have that. So adding on a little bit of delay. Bit nicer, and then a touch of reverb just to give it a little bit more space. So with the other part of the guitar, I've panned one side to the right and one side to the left, adjusted the volumes a little bit, and we wind up with this. Next up, I wanted a sort of lift sound to come in when I introduce the whole animation. So I've just got this reverse cymbal here. And I think I added a little bit of delay in the send effect as well. Then I've got two crash cymbals that are turned way down, but it's just there to add in a little bit more variety. Just on those final two notes, they make them sound a little bit sparkly. With the guitar, that sounds like this. So next up, I've just got this standard MIDI track. I used Operator and one of the presets for bells. Operator's a really cool FM synth. I love playing around with it. But, you know, I wanted to save some time, so I used one of the presets. Just by itself, it's quite boring. Just sounds like this. So I played that and then resampled that track out and threw on a few effects. Now the reverb's not on, I turned that off. I do use the echo effect, which is a really unique delay, and some EQ as well. So that now sounds like this. Next up, I've added a little bit more layering to that bell and just added some reverb. This one is playing a slightly different note just to add in some more variation. And I pan these left and right. So with the other bells, it sounds like this. Then I've used a bass sample and kind of shaped it a little bit with some EQ and saturation, and played a bass line. You may or may not be able to hear that depending on your speakers, especially if you're listening to a phone, but it is there. So far, the music and sound effects were sounding like this. But I felt like it just ended way too quickly. So I took this sample of some bubbles and I ran it through a Max for Live pitch and echo effect just to sort of make it seem like it was bubbling but getting higher in pitch. Then I resampled that audio, faded it in and out, added some compression and a little bit of reverb. Now it's quite quiet. Originally I did have it a little bit louder, but it wound up being a little bit too overpowering. So it's just something in the background there to try and end everything. So that was pretty much everything. So altogether we wound up having this. The next step was just to export this and line it up with the animation in After Effects, render everything out, and the animation was complete. So with all of the music, sound effects, and animation combined, we finally wound up with a finished product. This was a super long process for me to get finished, but overall I'm pretty happy with how it all turned out. I really hope that you were able to get something out of this as well. I know a lot of it was really shooting past relatively quickly, but if you have any questions, as I said before, please leave them down below in the comments section, and maybe I'll see if I can create some tutorials that focus on particular parts that might have been skimmed over in half a second. So yeah, that's it for me today, everybody. Hit the like if you like, and if you don't, tell me why. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.